Hello, everybody, and welcome. I'm Betsy, the Coach's Coach and Communication Specialist, and I'm grateful that you're here today for Quality Conversations, 5 ways that you can strengthen connection when you're communicating with somebody else. Navigating this new landscape that we find ourselves in with the cessation of sport due to COVID-19, there are ways that we need to connect or try to connect with others virtually in the absence of shared space. What I'd like to do today is to give everyone on the call, whether you are a coach or an administrator, an athlete, an analyst, there are certain things that we can do whenever we're communicating with someone that allow us to create stronger connections. So I want to go through those with you today. Thank you to Hudl for having me on and allowing me to share this space with you. I'm going to share my screen with you now so we can dive into today's topics. Quality conversations. Again, these are things that anybody can do, whether you're having a conversation with someone in person, on the phone, or virtually over Zoom or any kind of shared meeting space. These are things that anyone can do to increase the quality of the conversations that we have with other people. You've likely heard that the greatest barrier to connection is that we don't listen to understand. We listen to reply. And I'm here to tell you this isn't all your fault. The average person speaks at a rate of about 150 words per minute. However, our brains have the ability to listen up to 1,000 words per minute. So there's a big difference there. And what we tend to do with that extra time and space is think about how we're going to reply, because we want to keep the conversation going. Most of us are uncomfortable with silence. So we typically don't listen to understand. We have the intention of, and yet our thoughts get in the way. Most often we listen to reply. So how can we change this, knowing that listening is essential to our ability to connect with others in conversation? A few ways that you can work on this. Listening to understand involves a few key components. The first is something that I'm going to call conversational turns. And you see in parentheses there, it says Act 18. ACT stands for Active Communication Technique. And these are short videos that you can find on my YouTube channel. If you search Betsy Butterick, there's 30 of them that come up. ACT stands for Active Communication Technique. All of the videos are roughly 2 minutes in length or less, and designed to give anybody something they can do today to improve the way that we communicate and connect with other people. Act 18, I believe it's called Me Too versus More You. This talks about conversational turns, and what conversational turns are the way that we take turns when we're in communication with someone. If you were to sit in a public space, even at a distance, and listen to conversations, you'll hear people taking turns. And typically, we're taking turns talking about ourselves. So the example I give in Act 18 is I travel a lot, and let's say I sit down on an airplane, I start talking with my seatmate. If he starts telling me about the time he went skydiving, as soon as he finishes talking, I'm likely going to say something like, oh, when I went skydiving, and then tell what's called a Me Too story. There's nothing wrong with that. We do this all the time with other people, even people we know well, because we're trying to create a connection. We're telling a story about our experience relevant to something that they've said. So we're having a Me Too moment, and we're adding that to the conversation. What's interesting is when you skip the Me Too moment and instead use that space and take your conversational turn to ask a more you question. So instead of telling my seatmate about the time I went skydiving, I would instead ask a question like, oh my gosh, when you first stepped out of the plane into nothing, what did it feel like? Did you have anything to compare it to? So I'm going to use my turn to ask the person I'm in conversation with a follow-up question about something that they've said. And then when it's my turn to speak again, I might then tell my seatmate about the first time that I went skydiving. So skipping a Me Too space, using that space for more you to ask more or inquire greatly or deeper about the other person creates a greater sense of connection. It's a little counterintuitive because when someone's talking to us, especially a stranger, we think, oh, I need to talk about what they just said relevant to me so that I can show we're on the same page. Not necessarily true. You can still do that, but when you skip a turn and you go at a ratio of 2 to 1, the best conversationalists go at a ratio of 3 to 1, question, and then more Me Too statement. So more you, me too. Simply thinking about this and becoming more aware of it is going to allow you to have conversations that create a stronger connection with other people. Give it a try. If you need more info, go to YouTube, check out Act 18. Continuing with listen to understand, you can have the last word. And again, this is an ACT video, the most recent one, Act 30. And in Act 30, I talk about an improv game. Improv is fantastic for communication, specifically because improv works on the basis of taking whatever is immediately available and then using it to find a way forward. The only reason improv works is that all the players on the stage are committed to upholding the stories of other people. And I think if we were to bring that intention into our day-to-day, we'd find ourselves having much more interesting and connective types of conversations. The game I talk about in Act 30 is called Last Word, and it's a simple game to play. Anybody can play this. You can play this with the people that you might be sheltered in place with during COVID-19, or you can play this virtually with a Zoom call with your team or organization. The game goes like this. One person starts and they're going to say any sentence. Whatever the last word of their sentence is, the next person in line has to begin their sentence with that same word. So you're using the last word from one person, making it the first word that the next person starts with, and the game goes on. So I won't spoil it and take your time to give an example here. Check out Act 30. But again, quick improv game that works on communication. The reason that this helps with listening is because in order to play the game, you have to listen until the very last word of the sentence from the person before you. So this causes us to forego listening to reply and instead listen to understand, and then works on our response time to be able to take that last word, make it the first word of our sentence, and then hopefully make our sentence make sense. So if that sounds like fun, give it a go. Finally, great listeners ask this question. This is Act 26. And in Act 26, I talk about the fact that most of us go through life as if we have noise-canceling headphones on, which if we were trying to have a conversation with someone, we would never do because it would be considered rude. A way to take the headphones off and instead of listening to reply, truly start listening to understand is to keep one question in mind while we're listening. And that question is, what can I learn? And this is the question we tend to forget most often with the people that we feel like we know well. Our friends, our family members, our significant others, our teammates, our coworkers. When we ask that question, as someone's talking and we keep thinking, what can I learn? What can I learn? What can I learn? We're actively seeking new information. And in doing so, it's causing us to pay more attention than we might otherwise. So 3 tips here. If you really want to work on listening to understand, knowing that listening, truly listening, is one of the greatest gifts we can give to someone else, that's going to make a connection. So any of these 3 can be helpful. The second tip, emotional intelligence. And I gave a definition here for those that may be unfamiliar. This is from Travis Bradbury and Gene Greaves. They wrote Emotional Intelligence 2.0. Daniel Goleman was first responsible for popularizing this concept of emotional intelligence, different from our IQ. Now we're talking about our EQ, so the way that we're smart emotionally, and what that means in terms of psychology, in terms of social behavior. So the definition given here is emotional intelligence is your ability to recognize and understand emotions in yourself and others, and your ability to use this awareness to manage your behavior and your relationships. So psychologist and behavioral science researcher Daniel Goleman first popularized the idea back in, I believe it was 1995, when he published his best-selling book, Emotional Intelligence. Today, leading companies and corporations have come to value EQ as an essential quality that they look for during the hiring process. It's the same thing with our teams and with our organizations. While your IQ, how smart you are, your intelligence quotient, while your IQ is valuable, research has consistently shown that people with an average IQ and a high EQ outperform those who simply have a high IQ. So you can be wicked smart, but unless you're also emotionally savvy, you're eventually going to hit a ceiling in regards to connectivity. So how do we bring EQ into our conversations? You can start by listening for emotional words. In conversation, people will often say that they're excited or worried or nervous or happy or frustrated about something or looking forward to something. Pay attention and listen for the emotional data that they're giving you, as this can help you shape where you go in the conversation or perhaps where you don't go. Vanessa Van Edwards is a behavioral investigator and self-described recovering awkward person, which I love. And she first introduced me to this idea of dopamine-inducing conversation starters. So dopamine, along with other chemicals like serotonin, oxytocin, endorphins, all of these play a vital role in how happy we feel. Essentially, how can we use language to borrow dopamine from someone's life experience and bring it into the context of our conversation with another person? The answer is in how we phrase our questions. So asking things like, are you working on anything exciting? Or what's your favorite sports memory? Or tell me about a recent win you had. What's the best thing that happened to you today? When's the last time you felt really excited about something? What's your favorite holiday and why? Where would you vacation if you could go anywhere in the world? All of these questions are double clicking on dopamine. They're tapping into a positive experience that somebody had independent of us and borrowing chemically those dopamine inducing words and language and memories and bringing it into the conversation. So now the other person is having a feel good moment while they're conversing with us, and we've done nothing else except be strategic with our language. So double click on the dopamine, bring positive emotions into your conversation to create a stronger chemical connection with someone. Now, not all of our conversations are innately positive, especially now when folks are grieving the loss of their season or sports being canceled due to the COVID-19 pandemic. So what do we do to create connection during those types of conversations? When the emotional data you get from someone is less positive, you can instead validate and invite. Validate what they're feeling with statements like, that sounds really hard, or wow, that had to be a huge disappointment. And then you can invite them to tell you more. So for example, that sounds really hard. How are you working through it? Or, wow, that had to be a huge disappointment. Have you figured out what you'll do next? The individual that you're talking with might not want to talk further, but extending the invitation to do so can be a connective offering. So keep that in mind. Number 3, quick connective hits. And as a former coach, I love quick hits, those creative plays that score some points right away. Here's a few that you can do in conversation in order to create connection. The first one, use the other person's name. Say their name once or twice. You don't have to get creepy with it. The most interesting and some of the best conversations that I've had with other people involve them saying my name more than once. If you think about it, the very first thing we're given when we're born is a name. Now, it might be the same name as someone else, but it's uniquely ours. It's how we identify. I am Betsy. People are primed to pay attention when they hear their name. So saying it occasionally in conversation perks their ears up and re-engages them. Additionally, using someone's name in conversation is a micro acknowledgement that you see them. It's the linguistical difference between looking at someone and seeing someone. So even if I'm in conversation with just one other person, I'm going to intentionally insert their name into the conversation. And you can do this a variety of places. You could do it at the beginning. If, let's say, you pick up the phone, instead of saying, hey, you might say, Betsy, unless their name's not Betsy. In that case, don't do that part. But insert their name a time or two into the conversation wherever it's appropriate. If nothing else, try the beginning. Hey, Betsy, good to hear from you. Or at the end, you know what, Betsy, great to talk with you. I appreciate your call. The next quick hit, replace but with and. This idea is not new, and it's a small shift anyone can make that dramatically changes the nature of our conversations. Oftentimes we use the word but when and could give a more connective feel to our words, and here's why. But negates, and supports. But typically gives more weight to one portion of the sentence or conversation and sees both portions as having value. But is dismissive and is inclusive. But contrasts and connects to people and to possibilities. It's the difference between saying, I want to have better conversations, but I'm not a great communicator, or saying, I want to have better conversations and I'm working on my communication skills. So again, small shift, but big difference, or small shift and big difference. And this is something that leaders make a common practice in their language and in their conversation with others. The third quick hit, reducing weak language. Weak language, also known as filler words or weak words, are the words we typically use in place of silence or words that water down or weaken our message. Common examples include so, like, just, kinda, sorta, I don't know, basically, obviously, that's a big one. Think about your recent emails. I'm willing to bet most of you that are listening right now have written an email at some point in the last week that said something like, I'm just reaching out because, or I just wanted to check in about, unless something just happened, all just does is serve to weaken our message. Take it out. Take it out, and you're saying the same thing, except now you're saying it with more power and purpose. So I'm just reaching out because becomes I'm reaching out because. I just wanted to check in about becomes I wanted to check in about. A great exercise in this is to record yourself the next time you're on the phone or perhaps a virtual meeting. Play back the recording and listen for your weak language. What are your go-to weak words? Mine used to be so. I'd start many of my sentences with so, and I still do so occasionally. I've likely done it already. Identify your weak language and work to reduce it if you want to have more connective conversations. Tip number 4, and I live in San Diego, so I had to throw an obligatory beach picture up here. Tip number 4 is about creating space for dialogue, which is essentially how much space do your words allow for others to respond? And I'll give you some recruiting examples. Oftentimes when I'm working with coaches on communication, let's say I'm listening to recruiting calls and I'll hear them ask a question with a prospective student athlete at the beginning of a conversation, something like this. How's school going? Is it good? Which is a terrible question for 2 reasons. One, compound question. How's school going is one question. Is it good is another. Secondly, in asking the question based on the way they phrased it, they've made it very difficult for the person on the other end of the phone to negate the response. How's school going? Is it good? As a student athlete, a prospective student athlete who wants my coach or future coach to think favorably of me, it's going to be really hard for me to say, actually, coach, no, I'm struggling right now. It's much easier for me to say, oh, yeah, it's okay. So instead of how's school going, is it good, scaling that back to how's school going, that's better. And yet the issue with this is the individual on the other end of the phone can still answer with a one-word response. Good, not good. And then we're put in a place where it's time for us to ask the next question. A better question, one that would leave greater space for dialogue, is instead if that coach were to say, tell me what you're doing in school, or what are you working on in school currently? Anything around that sort of structure that allows for a greater response. So if you think about the different chairs on the screen, think of these as different possibilities or options for the conversation to go. Think about the questions that you ask and then ask yourself if you can think of better questions. Can you phrase your questions in an open way that allows the greatest room for response? How many chairs can you fill? Curiosity gives us information. The more information we have, the more options are available to us for engaging the other person in conversation. Tip number 5 is my favorite because it's always in season, and I'd say that it's needed now more than ever. Gratitude, expressing gratitude, thanking somebody else when you're in conversation for their time, for listening, for sharing, for their patience or humor, for doing their part during COVID-19, washing their hands, whatever it might be. Saying thank you, saying I appreciate you, saying I'm grateful for you, and not just you, but as we talked about earlier, adding their name, understanding the importance of connecting through saying somebody's name, telling people that you appreciate them or you're grateful for them. Expressing genuine gratitude is one of the most connective things we can do in conversations with others. With that, I want to thank all of you for taking time to improve your communication in service of having better conversations. If you'd like to continue working on your communication skills, there's a few ways you can do so. As I mentioned earlier, there are 30 ACT videos on YouTube. Again, ACT stands for Active Communication Technique. They're roughly 2 minutes in length, something anybody can do today to improve the way that we communicate and connect with others. If you're a coach and you're listening and you really want to up your communication so as to improve the quality of the student-athlete experience and increase the success of your program, head over to my website, betsybutterick.com. Check out the digital course, Winning with Words, Championship Communication for Coaches. It's free to preview. The course includes over 100 videos, plus resources and worksheets to immediately improve your communication, knowing that this is the ultimate competitive advantage. May we all keep in mind that when it comes to communication, the goal is not perfection, it's intention. If I can be of service to you or your team, please reach out via email, betsy@betsybetterup.com, or follow on Twitter or Instagram for tips to bring greater awareness to our communication. Thank you again for your time. Thank you for your contribution to the sporting community. I wish you well, and I look forward to learning from you. Take care, everyone. Thank you.